Welcome back to the Fixture of Coupe channel, guys. Today what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to install an AC compressor on a C5. We're going to show you how to take out the steering rack, and we're going to show you how to install a harmonic balancer. Let's go. So if many of you don't know, I purchased this car December 23rd of 2016. So I've had it almost 6 years now. Bought it in the wintertime in New England. It's ice cold outside, so I never got to run the air conditioning. In May, April, May, when I got the car back out, I was getting ready when it was getting hot out. The first year I had it, the air conditioning didn't work. So I hit it with your typical AutoZone Advanced Auto Parts recharge kit. Recharged it, it would work. The only problem that I would have, or continuously had, was it would keep losing coolant. Never held a full charge. And at first, the Schrader valve was leaking. Problem solved. I fixed that. We vacuumed the whole system down and refilled it again. Awesome. It held 3/4 of the summer. And I had blend door problems where the passenger side would be cold and the driver's side would be warm. I reset the blend door. That fixed that problem. Pulled the fuse. And then every year, once you'd start up, you'd have to re-top it off. You'd have to fill it. So this year, I just fired the car up. It's hot out. Nothing. There's no pressure in it. It's completely empty. So we found the culprit. Well, at least I think I found the culprit, and I'll show it to you. When you refill these things, there's your Schrader valve, is where you put your coolant and refrigerant in. I never clean that, and here's your black light. So there's a bunch of dye, usually when you fill the things, right? Well, General Motors has a 2-piece AC compressor. Look at all that leakage right there. From my understanding, if the car sits for a long period of time, the seal in between the two parts of the case goes bad. You're supposed to start the car up, run the air conditioning, once, twice a month just to keep it normal, which, as many of you guys that have Corvettes, I'm sure in crappy weather, yours is a garage clean. Mine's a garage clean for the most part, but I do like to take it out, and I do like to have air conditioning because the car's black, and when it's 100 degrees here and humid, it's disgusting in that thing with leather seats and having a black car. So we got to get that fixed. So there's a couple other things too. The cam swap on the car, and I think it was like 4 years ago. The harmonic balancer was in good shape. It was the original one. It didn't have the wobble or the separation. Now I'm getting the chirp, and if you look at it, it's got the slight wobble as the car is idling. So to prevent any failure, a catastrophic failure, we're going to swap out the harmonic balancer. I figured you got to pull the water pump to get to the AC compressor, and you got to pull the steering rack to get to the harmonic balancer. I already took the harmonic balancer off before when I did the can swap and took the whole steering rack. It's kind of a pain in the butt. It's not that bad, but it is what it is. So we'll give you a rundown. We'll walk you through how I do some of the steps and to get to it, reinstall it, etc. It's the original water pump with 52,000 miles on it. They're like $140 on Amazon for a brand new AC Delco one. I know if it's not broken, don't fix it, but I'm in there. I might as well, because you know as well as I do, the LS style, whether you have a truck, a car, they always tend to have a bad bearing or some sort of leak or some sort of problem. So I'm just going to throw a brand new one in there. The only thing I'm going to reuse is my thermostat. It's I think it's a Hennessy one. It's like a 160-degree thermostat. We're going to keep that, reuse that. I lied. It's a Lingenfelter, however the hell you say it. Anyways, we're going to swap that out and then put the car back together. So I went to Rock Auto and I ordered a 4 Seasons air compressor. They're pretty much all made in China. Even the OEM AC Delco ones were made in China. So this wasn't the cheapest. It wasn't the most expensive. I think it was $180. It is what it is. I bought a Power Bond, which was supposed to be pretty good. Harmonic balancer. It's a Dayco Power Bond. And instead of doing the GM bolt, which if any of you have installed it, it's like 35 foot-pounds and then keep torquing 140 degrees past, which is like, I think it ends up being like 280 or 260. This supposedly, you torque it at 235 foot-pounds of torque and you're just done with it. When I put the cam in last time, I had a buddy hold the brakes and put the clutch in 4th. Actually, I think I had it in 5th. But the clutch was a factory clutch and it did not hold the torque wrench. So last time, I didn't know there was a tool, but I did the old school way where I put a pry bar on the flywheel and held it while he torqued it. In case I have to do it the legit way, your starter comes out, And this bolts in and holds the flywheel so you can torque your crankshaft down to your specific torques. The clutch is a brand new LS7 clutch, which is good for like 500 foot-pounds of torque. So I'm hoping that with the back brake or the e-brake on and the clutch engaged, I'd be able to torque that at 235 foot-pounds of torque, I would hope. I also have the good old Amazon special, which is a LS install balancer tool. I had another one that I used, but it didn't have a bearing, and this one has a bearing that goes between the washers and the nut when you tighten it up. So hopefully that makes installation a little bit easier. The only thing I don't have is the Harmonic balancer puller. A lot of people say they use a Dodge one. I got lucky last time, and just a regular old 3-job puller, I was able to finagle it on there, pull it off with a socket on the center of the crank. So we're gonna do that again. The crank, whatever the hell I said. Center of the crank, and hopefully we'll get that off in one piece, and I can kind of show you how I do it. So let's get to it, I guess. Okay, so first things first, obviously you disconnect your battery. Take off your air dam, pull your serpentine belt and your air conditioning belt. You don't have to take your alternator out, but I do because it does give you a little bit more room to get to the steering column as well as to the top of the power steering brakes. The last time I did it, I used a suction, like a syringe to pull all the power steering fluid out of the reservoir so it didn't drip everywhere and make a mess. A lot of people that I see that remove the steering rack, when they do this, they actually lower the cradle and they pull the steering rack out the driver's side because there's kind of like a big hump on that side where the actual rotating mass is for it, like the gears and such. When I did my cam swap, I did not lower the cradle at all. I essentially just slid it through the passenger side and it like hung out probably to here and just balanced in between the frame rail where the gears were. And it was plenty enough room to get to the harmonic balancer to be able to pull it and install it and put a cam in it. So I'm gonna do that this way because I'm gonna be jacking the car up from the front on jack stands. So it should make it a lot easier to get to it that way, hopefully. Set up a little time lapse. We'll get some of this stuff disconnected, what I can do with it on the grounds, and then I'll get it up in the air on jack stands, chock the wheels, and we'll start taking it apart. The car's in the air. Take the tires off, take the serpentine and the air conditioning belt completely out. That way when I drain the water pump, it doesn't get all contaminated with fluid, coolant I should say, and then we'll kind of start taking everything apart. Looks like my belt took a chunk out of itself. I hope it's not because the balancer is moving back. I got some serious problems. Hopefully it's just maybe it was on wrong on the first turn around on the rib and it took a chunk out and adjusted itself, but I guess we'll see. So I have the radiator coolant draining out of the water pump, the lower hose, because when I went to use the pit cock on the radiator, where are you? This little pin came out of the pit cock. You put a 1/4-inch ratchet in and you twist it and it opens the pit cock. But this fell out of, it's almost like a little keyway. I'm hoping that's not where it locks in. See if I can fix it. If not, I hope I didn't mess the radiator up. But if that's the case, well, you know how that goes. We'll just grab a new one. But yeah, let's get this thing drained and start taking the water pump out. And then we'll get to the steering rack, get to the balancer. I have a new water pump coming. It has not been delivered yet. And then I also ordered a crank seal for the behind the balancer. That hasn't got here yet. So that'll put me in limbo, but we'll still keep clicking away. Oh yeah, making a mess. All right, next, the 6 water pump bolts, 3 on this side, 3 on the driver's side. Let's take this bad boy out. Water pump is out. It's 3 bolts on each side. The toughest one is the top bolt here. where my flashlight is, where the tip of this is, you kind of hit the electronic brake control. But as long as you got a swivel on there, you should be able to get it in and out, no problems. So let's start on taking steering rack out. You want to make sure that your steering wheel is straight when you take your rack out. And if you have the lockout kit, which undoes the steering rack from locking, try to do something to hold it in place. The first time I think I tied it with not zip tie, but tie strap. If you leave it straight, as you can see right there, I'll zoom in, you take that bolt off. That is your steering column into your rack and pinion. You're gonna pull that bolt off, as well as, first step is take the end of the tie rods off, as well as that. And then we're gonna take the power steering lines off, which are 18 millimeter. So you wanna get an open box wrench and or a flare wrench to be able to get those off easier. The electronic brake control, you're gonna pull the brackets for this. So you wanna support this. Last time I did it, I just zip tied it up around the power steering bracket, or you could bungee cord it, just do something, because you're gonna have to pull the bracket for that because it's bolted to where the steering rack goes to the frame. On the bottom end down here, you're gonna take your power steering cooler, you're gonna unbolt that, you're gonna swing that up, as well as, like, this is the bracket right here, these 4 bolts, those hold in the electronic brake control. You're gonna take those out, unbolt it, and you're gonna support that. And then behind that, there's 1 bolt for your steering rack, and the other one's right here. So those are, I believe they're 18 mils. Those are torqued down, so they are a little bit to get off. And you're gonna unbolt those and slowly raise this out of the mounts. And like I said, I slid it out the passenger side. Some people lower the subframe bolts and they drop that. You also need to remove your sway bar links and sway bar mounts. Take the sway bar completely out of the car to have room to do things in here. And then you should be able to pull the harmonic balancer out, get the new one in, and put the car back together. Well, we gotta do the AC compressor still too. All right, sway bar's out, tie rod ends are done. It's time to get the steering linkage off. It's a 13 millimeter, got an extension on there, and then I'm gonna work on those power steering lines. Those, the last time I did it, took forever. They're a big pain in the butt. I'm gonna get this disconnected, let the power steering fluid drain, and then I'll work on getting the bracket off and getting all the unmounts undone. So the steering shaft is square, as you can see. Basically, it just slides off. It's a little snug down the bottom, obviously, because that's where it gets bolted down and goes around it, but just put a little pry bar in there and pry it directly off towards the block. Let's see if I can get it on video. There we go, it's off. So now it's time to get the power steering lines, which are right here. Those are 18 millimeters and they are a pain to get. So hopefully you have various sized 18 millimeters. These open flare ones are gonna be your best friends, also, as well as the little stubbies. It was more like when I did it last time, turn it, spin the wrench, grab this side, turn it again, spin the wrench, turn it. Took a while, but we'll get it out. So the power steering lines are out of the power rack, the steering rack, I should say. Start with the top one, get that out of the way first, and then go to the bottom one. It gives you more room to be able to get your wrench in there. The bottom one, I gotta clean out the threads a little bit. I capped it off there. That's the, I believe, the return line. So I think that's where all the fluid's leaking from. That one down there is a pressure line, I believe. So it's not really leaking. We're gonna take the power steering cooler out, which is right, the bolts are right there. They look like 10 millimeters to me. And then we'll kind of take it and we'll swing it up and get it out of the way. And then I'm gonna go support the electronic brake control. And I'm gonna take these bolts out and we're gonna get that bracket out of the way. And then take the 2 bolts out and hopefully get the whole steering rack out. Just for a little support, I just put a breaker bar with a zip tie on there just to hold the weight of that up a little bit when I take the bracket off. So the electronic brake controller is held in by 3 bolts. 1 there, or 3 nuts. 1, 2, they're a stud, and then there's 1 on the other side. So you just back them off a little bit, loosen them up, and then that'll allow this to pretty much dangle there. Brake controller bracket needs to come out now. There's 4. Those are 13 millimeter bolts that go to the subframe. Then that's an 18 millimeter that holds the steering rack in. as well as that 18 millimeter. And then you should be able to pry it up and get that steering rack out enough to get to the harmonic balancer and get to the AC. Well, I can get to the AC compressor now with the water pump out, but we got to do that balancer first. When you're taking the power rack out or the steering rack out, those are 18 millimeter bolts. On the back side, there is a nut, so you want to make sure you get a wrench on there, otherwise it's just going to spin and spin and spin. That's on both sides. So I made a last second decision. The bracket that holds the brake controller up was getting stuck on the back of the fan here, so I just took the fan out, make it easier on myself. Comes out pretty easily. There's 4 10 millimeter bolts that hold the top of the shroud in, and you just undo those and you pull it up. It's just in these clips and it goes right underneath the car. Plenty of room in there now to work on this. I'm worried about that pit cock if I might have broke something, so I'm thinking maybe I'm just gonna grab a new radiator while I'm ahead of the game and swap that out and put that in there while I'm here. Now in theory, the steering rack should pop out. Got a little pry bar in there. See if I can pry this end up. Pry this end out. Oh yeah, she's nice and loose. So we're gonna work this out. The passenger side, like I said, should give me enough room to put the harmonic balancer in. Now that I bench pressed it out of the way, it's out of the way enough for me to essentially do the harmonic balancer. I got it rotated, so the steering shaft, the actual like shaft of the bracket pinion is facing down and rotated. I believe that's how I did it last time. It's out of the way just enough to where I'll be able to put a harmonic balancer on there. And then put it back in place, and then I'll do the AC compressor, and I'll put the water pump back in. Just a little pointer for you. If you have a factory bolt in there, it's gonna have red Loctite on it. I put a little bit of heat to it with a torch, came right off. Prior to that, my impact gun could not take it off. I don't like the end of those threads there, how dark and like grimy they are. So I might make this bolt into like a thread chaser, cut a slit in it, put some grease on it, just work in and out of the threads once the balancer's off, just to clean them up, and I'll wash it out real good. The old harmonic balancer is out. If you want to figure out a puller, you could use a Chrysler style. As you can see, these hooks, they go around. Let me flip this around. These go on the sides, and they hook on, and it works good. The only downfall is the one I rented at O'Reilly's, it comes with a pin that goes into the crank and goes into the end of that. It's not long enough. So I ended up using an old school 3-job puller. They don't really fit. You have to really loosen these bolts up so they really wiggle. And you have to put them in sideways like this. The same thing. And you put this side in, and then you get it really loose. And you have to almost take it apart to get it in. But then when you screw it back together, it locks it in there and doesn't move. And I threw a socket on the end of the crank, and I was able to get it out. Inspecting it, it doesn't look too bad. Right here, you can tell it's starting to separate a little bit. And then I noticed on the back here, where was it? Right in this area here, it looks like there's a seam, but that seam is starting to crack and like peel back, so that's probably where the wobble's coming from. So I'm waiting on parts. My water pump has not showed up yet. The crank seal will be here tomorrow, so I can't even put the new harmonic balancer on. So what we'll do is we'll call it quits for today. As you can see, the garage is a mess. The next episode, we will put the crank pulley back on. We'll put the steering rack back in. We'll take the AC compressor off. I'm gonna order a new radiator because I don't know, I'd rather be safe than sorry. I know that I did a little research, the little pin that fell out that I showed you earlier, that actually is like a little keyway that opens up the valve inside the radiator, so it fell out, so I'm assuming it's gonna stay closed, but I'd rather not assume, seeing that I'm gonna fill this thing back up with coolant and all I'm gonna do is get a leak. So I'm gonna order a new radiator today from Rock Auto. I think it was a 2-day delivery, so it'll probably be here Wednesday or Thursday. That'll be the last thing I do anyways when I put the car back together, so we'll get it back together. We'll do another episode. Come back and check that out. Like, comment, subscribe. If you're new here, leave me a comment. Hit that like button. We'll see you again. Later.